nobody was tortured. There is a torture statute. It's the only standard that applies to the question of whether somebody was tortured or not. What's portrayed in the film is not what was done by the CIA. Understand, there were 3 people who were waterboarded by the CIA. 3. That's what the fuss is about. I can't wait until the Senate committee report is released, because what you will find when the Senate committee report is released is that they spoke to no one who was involved in the program. They didn't talk to any director of the CIA. They didn't talk to any deputy director of the CIA. They didn't talk to any interrogator. They didn't talk to me. They didn't talk to any other AG. They talked to no one. They went out and cherry-picked documents and took specific quotations from documents and painstakingly stitched them together.
I'm a little troubled that we quibble about the definition of torture.
This seems too legalistic to you?
Well, the United States has been a beacon of human rights since the end of World War II, okay? The Convention Against Torture is a treaty that we not just signed, we negotiated it, we pushed it, okay? These are the fundamental values of this country. And to quibble about whether we're getting close to enough mental duress or enough physical duress that it constitutes torture, to me that's just a remarkable conversation to be having.
I don't support waterboarding. I think it's against the standards, the values of our country. An individual by the name of Ayman Farris was identified. Ayman Farris came here, sent by Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, to take down suspension bridges, specifically the Brooklyn Bridge. He came and saw police on the bridge. He sent a message back that the weather at that time was too hot, meaning there were police in the area.
And they abandoned.
We would not have known anything about Ayman Farris if it wasn't for Khalid Sheikh Mohammed giving up that information.
Theo van Gogh, I think you could say easily was probably the most well-known man, the most famous man in the Netherlands, and he's still so. In this particular project, he really wanted to provoke first the Muslim community, but more importantly, the liberal community in the Netherlands to say, wait a second, we are dealing with women who are beaten by their husbands and they're justifying their actions in the name of their religion. Women who are being raped, women who are being killed, and we liberals were going around saying, diversity, inclusion, multiculturalism, but what are we doing about this?
The real bigotry in the West today is the bigotry towards Muslims that assumes that the status quo is pretty much what it's going to be, that you have 1.5 billion Muslims who have no interest in better lives, not submitting to this, not submitting to these strictures, who are just sort of contented with their lot, and what's important to do is not to offend them, not to shake them, not to make them think.
The premise from the beginning is that Islamic extremism is not rooted in Islam. Now, when it comes to the doctrine, unreformed, if you're not afraid of it, you're foolish. If you're not afraid of a belief system that urges day in, day out, that believers go out and kill and maim and sell women into sex slavery and engage in, if you're not afraid of that, then I don't know on which planet you live.
Can the left recover something of the spine of a Franklin Roosevelt or a Harry Truman, who knew that those values we cherish, free speech, provocation, freedom of religion, absence of religion, freedom to insult, that those rights need a stalwart defense, that the answer isn't simply to submit to the totalitarians, whether it's Lenin, Stalin, Bin Laden, or Omar al-Baghdadi? I think that's the question that we are confronted with now.
I am campaigning for a Muslim reformation, and I believe it's underway. And Ladies and gentlemen, I'm telling you, the way to get there is not going to be through the clerics. Hanging around waiting for Muslim clerics to adapt doctrine, it's not going to happen. It's going to come through a relentless process of blasphemy. Every single Muslim who looks at you and says, I'm offended, my feelings are hurt, you have to say, what hurts your feelings more? The sacred text or human life? This woman who's beaten or the sacred text? This woman who's raped or the sacred text? Human life, human freedom, human dignity matters more than any sacred text. Christians have been through it, Jews have been through it. It's now time that Muslims go through it, and we better stop kidding ourselves. If you want to help, you're going to blaspheme.
There's a whole mystique in America. Look, one thing is you can't just talk. You talk too much. You think too much. That's not against talking and thinking. It's just that this film says underneath that, you better be prepared to use force when you have to. Because if people are bad enough, you've got to shoot them. You say, do any of us believe that? Well, how do you feel about President Eisenhower sending those 1,000 paratroopers to Little Rock? Now, where do we draw this line? Because the judges couldn't have done that by themselves. You could have had 9,000 judges ordering integration in the South, but it took more than that. And I usually say when I talk about this to judges from Africa or Asia, I say, you've got to have the people with you. You do have to have the people with you. It did take the Freedom Riders. It did take Martin Luther King. But it certainly didn't just take lawyers and judges.
When you're faced with a situation like Gitmo that doesn't have a black and white answer, it's so much easier to be like, wow, the world's complicated. I need to find some dogma to hold on to. Yeah. And I'm going to do that, you know? And it's like, I'm going to cling to that, and my life's a lot easier if I just think it's this way.
All she wants is to be like, they did 9/11? Please, if I could believe that, my life would just be golden. It's exactly what I want to be able to get behind. But and that's why she signs up for it too. It just takes the thinking out of it completely.
What fascinated me was that there's a handful of these guys down there, and they're just sitting there. It's like, in the beginning, that's why in the beginning we have this montage to allude to the fact that in the beginning, when they first showed up there, it was the Wild West. Yeah. People were getting beat, it's crazy. And it would be wrong to not at least, allude to that. But what happens after all that? What happens when everything's just kind of chill and relaxed, and they're just sitting there? And you're in this kind of like, Kafka, no exit type of situation where you're just stuck with yourself, That's the story that I think was more interesting to me, because that's the side you don't expect to see.
She wants to lose herself. She wants to take the individual out of it completely so she doesn't have to look inward, so she doesn't have to acknowledge things about herself. She doesn't have to exist. She just wants to be a part of a larger piece. And then there's just this slow, steady, tingling vitality. You're just like, I'm actually not dead, and oh my God, I can't accept this.
I was very conscious of To Kill a Mockingbird when I wrote The Lincoln Lawyer, that I was going to write this story about a different kind of lawyer, but he's going to get in the same situation where he had to risk everything to do the right thing. And if you can incorporate that into a story and add in a divorce and add in too much drinking and some underhanded stuff, but that is really an attractive thing, when it comes to telling story, when it comes to setting how you want to be as a person. Would you be able to do that? Those are questions that are really gripping.
In order for something to be, especially something in the arts or creative, to be successful, it's got to embody the opposites. A character like that, someone can say, like, well, you seek this guy out, you wanted to get paid, this is what you do for a living, but she didn't ask to almost get killed and to get raped.
One of the lawyers I researched this book with and spent a lot of time represented lots of prostitutes, and so I was a fly on the wall in his office, and I met several of them, talked to several of them, and
they would have come forward. They would have cooperated. They would have said, "Look, it's going to be so embarrassing for me. It's going to be awful."
But you also got to think in this person's heart, no matter what she did, she has really had an experience with someone that's really evil, that really had some kind of
you know, something going on inside, and something about her wanted to put that to a stop.
In this situation, you're absolutely right. I feel like it's, you know, the justice system is brutal, you know, with the sex workers, because I did watch a lot of videos and some interviews, and you know, a lot of these women, again, there's a stereotype, and so obviously if they're involved in a situation like that, you know, people say, well, you asked for it.
For all of New York City, my office covers all of New York City, Long Island, 5 counties north of the city. We have 39 lawyers. There are 300 federal prosecutors for that same area. So, you know, no matter where you're practicing, you're outgunned, significantly outgunned. And that has real consequences for what you can do in your cases, and it doesn't always match up to what you should be doing.
Something like 90 to 95% of people plead guilty. So there's only 5% of people getting to even have the kind of justice that we assume is happening. So when you start to think about the masses of people coming in, it shows the kind of vice grip that the criminal justice system has, particularly on the poor.
In 1963, the year of the Gideon Supreme Court decision, the number of people arrested on drug charges in the United States was 50 out of every 100,000. In the year 2000, it was 750 out of 100,000. So it is, I mean, it's not just that there's a shortage of lawyers, there's an excess of cases, a voluminous growth in cases, largely, not exclusively, but largely attributable to the war on drugs.
I'm not saying take away mandatory minimums and that solves all of it, but study after study after study shows that the severity of sentences does extraordinarily little to deter crime or to make us safer.
In states where judges have to run for election to office, and the way you get elected is by being tougher than tough on crime, you really want those justices to have more discretion?
I'm not suggesting that that's not also a big problem, but I don't see that, I see that as a problem on top of the other problem. I don't think that somehow by getting rid of mandatory minimums, judges will get even worse. You know, you'll still have judges who will play to a populist sense of tough on crime in certain areas, but at least, you know, give somebody a fighting chance.